Greetings and welcome to Office Hours. If you are new here and you want to learn a little bit more about what we do, you can head over to officehours.global. We answer your questions 7 days a week. So if you happen to be watching the replay, you can always submit your questions, media, technical, related, and you can ask that at askofficehours.global. For our producers, go ahead and submit your questions now for our panelists. And speaking of questions, Alexander, let's get into it.
First question this morning is from Mike Edwards in Brooklyn, New York. Morning, everyone. Using an Insta360 Flow in production and a wireless transmitting the feedback to the switcher. What options does the panel recommend to hold the transmitter in place while shooting? Placing in pocket is not an option.
Courtney?
Well, I'll tell you what I use. And for years, I've looked for something that would stick to the sides of gator cases to hold DAs and things like that. You got to plug a lot of cables into it. And the only thing I've found that attaches really well is it's called Dual Lock, and it's from Scotch or 3M. It's you can get it in clear black. It's a type of Velcro, but it's a hard Velcro, and it has these polyurethane little mushroom posts. So it doesn't have a male or a female side, so the same unisexual, it'll stick to itself. And it'll hold 10 pounds to 45 pounds, depending upon which direction you're pulling, and that stuff. And the adhesive that is on the back of it is that 3M adhesive that is indoor-outdoor adhesive that is, I think it's a polyurethane adhesive, so it's waterproof. And it sticks really well and doesn't let go when it heats up. And that's the thing you got to worry about. Regular Velcro, I found if there's any heat generated inside that device that you're putting it on the back of, after a while, as soon as it heats up, that adhesive is going to let go. But the adhesive that's on the back of this Dual Lock stuff really hangs on. And it's kind of expensive. It's about $1.60 a foot. But that price is really good on Amazon, $16.75 for two 10-foot lengths of it, 1 inch.
Alex?
I think that it depends. So this is the Flow. This is like a Osmo for the phone. So the phone is there. It is so you have a phone. The problem really is that motor is very sensitive. So anything that I'm kind of curious what you're using for that transmitter. Maybe you can post another question or another answer or another question there to let us know, because anything plugged into that phone oftentimes can throw the stabilization off. This is like a stabilizer for the phone. So I'd be very careful about what you have there. Now, one thing that you can look at is that at the bottom of that base, I believe there's a quarter 20. So a quarter 20 input. And so you could probably put something. There's a couple of things you could do. One is at the bottom of the base, not in the stabilizer part, but the part that you would stand up. I believe that there's some kind of quarter 20, or you'd need to attach something there. Look at cheese plates. Cheese plates are just an array of lots of little holes that you can screw into. And if you can put a cheese plate on the bottom of that, and you can get long ones, you can get, square ones, lots of different kinds of cheese plates. If you search for cheese plate, on Amazon and say metal, if you don't say metal cheese plate, you might get something that's wood and has a little cutter for your cheese. But if you really want cheese plates, you should be able to get them there. And you'll see 30 or 40 different versions of that, but you might be able to attach one to the bottom and then put the transmitter there. I'm curious though how you're wiring it to the phone in a way that doesn't have it be problematic. And so one way that people manage that is to with a phone, if we're using it, and I've never used this in production, but we'll have it just talk to an Apple TV somewhere else, clear nearby, and then that Apple TV will then be connected over HDMI to a transmitter because we don't want anything touching the phone. So that's the only thing I would think about.
Next question.
John Folson, Sealands Grove, Pennsylvania is asking, my vMix project is set to 1080p 2997. I have 4 NDI feeds that are 1080p 5994. I have 2 PTZ-Optics NDI cams at 1080, but they only have FPS as single numbers from 1 to 60, no 2997 or 5994. What settings should I use? Should everything match?
Go ahead, Alexander.
You do want everything to match. One thing that I have discovered with a lot of cameras is the user interface often will report whole frame rates, not fractional frame rates. So 24, 30, 60, for example, but oftentimes they will actually send out of their SDI HDMI port, they will actually send the fractional frame rate. So you'd have to verify. You can use little utilities like those decimator tools where they have a SDI or HDMI input and output, and they will read on the display exactly what is coming out of that camera. Another way to do it, like on some of my cameras, I actually have internal recording capabilities, record to the internal SD card or to some kind of storage medium, then actually look at the metadata of that recorded file. It should tell you exactly what the actual recorded frame rate is. Alex?
Yeah, it could be, because it does even increments one frame at a time. I am concerned that it doesn't really do a 2997 or 5994, but it could, as Alex said. I think that I would also look at the, in this case, what I'd probably do is set it to 30, and my NDI feeds, let us know whether those are cameras or computers. If they're cameras, the 5994 will create a framey look, because essentially what's happening is that typically these cameras are going to be set to 180 degree shutter. And that means that the amount of shutter, the amount it's opened, is dependent on the frames. If you take a 5994 source and you put it into a 2997 project, it'll throw every other frame away, but the motion blur was set for the 5994, which means it's got half the motion blur that it should have, which will make it look framey. So just something to kind of consider if those are actually cameras. You have to really think about that. The two ways to handle it, if they are cameras, is number one, is you set to 2997. If for some reason you can't, or it's part of a larger project that doesn't work that way, you can get the cameras and set them to 360 shutter speed, a 360 degree shutter. On 60 frames a second, no one notices. There's a lot of frames there. I've done it quite a few times, and no one really notices that it's happening. So you can turn that up, and then you're going to get proper. It'll be proper for the 2997. I mean, some people notice. I can see it. It looks just a little dreamy because it's got a little bit more motion blur than the frame rate. But I've never had anyone mention it other than me knowing. The reason we did that for a long time is because we would get 5994 1080i solutions or 720p, and we were streaming 30, and we would have to do that to make that adjustment. So if they're computer feeds, then you can probably leave them. There's typically no motion blur in the computer feeds. so you don't have to worry about it as much. It will add, throwing those frames away can add some CPU hit to your project. You may find your CPU usage is lower if all the frame rates match.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas asks, Olympic closing ceremony golden spiked man, Tom Cruise, motorcycle ride, Snoop Dogg, Billie Eilish, California beach concert, new Hollywood sign. What do you make of it all?
Alex?
I thought I didn't see the whole thing, but I did see the Tom Cruise motorcycle ride, and I thought it was a little over the top. like it was like, I mean, you want to be over the top, but it was pretty far over the top. I think that her is really good at just looking very casual as she plays guitar. She's got this whole like, I'm just hanging out and playing a guitar. She does that very well. I have to admit that I'm particularly sensitive to the motorcycle ride without a helmet on. I had a family member is in the hospital right now. Over the weekend they had an accident and broke everything. Like, they're hopefully going to be able to walk again. So having a motorcycle riding without a helmet is not something that I know I'm being old and curmudgeony, but motorcycles are really dangerous, and riding without helmets is even more dangerous. And I know that he did just finish jumping off the side of a stadium, so that was dangerous too. But I think that creating the cool, we need to, riding through the streets without a helmet is probably not the no one's expecting anyone to jump off the stadium, but people will feel like it's cooler to ride without a helmet. And as I said, I'm particularly sensitive to it right now because of my weekend.
Bill?
Global PR platform. That's basically what the Olympics are at that level. Yes, it's a contest for the finest athletes in the world, as it should be, but it also allows, as Paris did, I think, brilliantly, to show off the beauty of the location and the rest of that. So, what is unique about Los Angeles? It's that beach life from the Beach Boys music. Everybody was aspiring to be that person on a sun-soaked beach. And I think they're going to do a great job of that. The production industry there has been in kind of a depression for a good number of years now, as so many productions have run offshore. So if they can do a really good job of making Los Angeles look exactly like in the dreams of most people around the world, they will do well for the place in terms of tourism, in terms of being able to market it as that golden city on the coast that it has been in a lot of people's minds for a long time. So we'll see what happens. I think they did a pretty decent job of trying to hit a lot of spectrums. I mean, the Chili Peppers have been around for a long time. Billie Eilish is pretty fresh and new. Snoop Dogg, the traditional kind of hip-hop culture that invaded the entertainment industry. And I think that they've done themselves a lot of good in terms of the global audience, making it want to come and see what LA is all about. I am surprised that they're doing it in the Coliseum because that's such an old facility, but maybe that's a harken back to the classics of the previous Olympics. So we'll see what they do. I'm looking forward to it.
Courtney?
Yeah, that Coliseum was built for the Olympics back in the 30s, was it? Yeah. So, and then it also held the Olympics in 85 or 84 when they were here in Los Angeles. I didn't see the whole closing ceremony, so I did see Tom, zip lining down from the top of the stadium. And I didn't see him land at the Hollywood sign, strangely enough, because I could see that from here, and I didn't see him.
You're saying that wasn't real time?
Maybe that was visual effects or something. Or maybe it was shot, 4 weeks ago. I think it was. But I was not too impressed with the L.A. side of it, where they went to the beach. I guess they were trying to show off the beach, and it was a sunny, beautiful day, a little bit of haze, but that's the way it is at the beach sometimes. And but a fairly sparse set and a very small crowd of probably paid extras there listening to the Chili Peppers and Billie Eilish. Billie Eilish seemed to be mouthing to a track. The Chili Peppers seemed to be live. And Dr. Dre, I think, and Snoop were maybe live because, all it takes there is an open microphone for those guys. So, and they were listening to a track, beatbox track. But I wasn't too impressed with the setup that they did for those three acts from LA. But the rest of it, the stadium, they learned their lesson about going up and down the Seine and trying to broadcast from there and move it inside where there's less chance of rain spoiling it.
Alex?
Yeah, the Coliseum, I think they're going to I doubt they may build other things, but they're not going to build any new things that they don't have to. So they probably use the Coliseum for something. So that would make sense. I also, when you brought up the Chili Peppers, I have to believe that they were like, how did it come to this? We're in front of a big Olympics logo. I mean, just as knowing them from the 90s, it just seems like I don't know whether they're really excited they got to that point where they're playing in front of the Olympics, or they're just like, wow, well, it was a good payday, to do the. They must have been paid so much money to be willing to do that.
Kept their pants on. So that was good.
There's that, and that's not a minor thing. It's with the Peppers.
You know what, Alex, speaking of payday, it was interesting to see, I think it was last year that NBC had Snoop Dogg and Kevin Hart, and they were doing some commentary around the Olympics and really fun, hanging out with your friends, talking on the couch kind of type of content. And now this year, just seeing Snoop now, it makes even more sense why Snoop he did the announcement for the opening for the breakdancing, which is now an Olympic sport, and then also because it's going to be in LA. But I truly wonder what that payday looked like for Snoop from all the commentary, from all the things that he was woven into. So just putting that out there.
There's a lot of money floating around in the Olympics, evidently. So it's there's it probably was a small scratch on the surface of their budget, but still with some Snoop specifically, but with other ones, I'm sure that there was a pretty big payday and a really nice hotel and a lot of things that were connected to that. Yeah.
And it was just a wise move on their part, because you've got the social, just all of that content that came out of the Olympics, but then also having the continuum of people talking about Snoop and Martha Stewart and their how they create content together and just their relationship. It was just, that was the part that I was most, the social engagement.
And I'm curious at how many of the stars that were there were at least paid for, at least, like, hey, if you want to go, we'll give you great tickets and fly you in. Like that, I think Snoop was probably paid. I don't think all of them were necessarily paid, but there were a lot of, and I think that it probably added a lot, what they felt like added a lot of production value. There was a lot of complaints about people saying, why are we keep on going to all these, folks in the crowd? But it adds a little like, oh, they're in front of a lot of, people that we know kind of thing. So.
Right. Tony?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that the facility of the Coliseum is just one of the venues that's already there. The Clippers are going to be opening their new arena this year. So we have Staples and then the Clippers' new arena. And also, I would not be surprised if they do some modifications to the Coliseum as well before 2028.
And Courtney?
I think they're planning on improving the transportation to all the venues using some type of people mover of some sort to move people between the venues is supposedly on the drawing boards. And no, there will not be breakdancing in the Olympics in 2028. This is a one-off shot. I don't think it's going to be returning. I don't know. Maybe it'll come back in 8 years. But according to officials, there will be no breakdancing competition in LA. Unfortunately, where it all started.
Next question.
From the QR code Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada, the Akai Pro MIDImix MIDI control surface is on sale at Sweetwater. Can this be used in production well? How is the durability and quality?
Alexander?
So this is what we're talking about here. This is a roughly $100 MIDI controller. Would I use this in a production environment? No. I mean, it's a $100 plastic MIDI controller with short throw faders that they're kind of janky feeling. I mean, I've messed around with these things. So for playing around at home, they're fine. In anything serious, no. I'm not sure what you're trying to do, Chester, or what you're trying to control, but I know many people that use, for example, like the Behringer X32 rack, which is a very popular digital mixer. A lot of people end up with the matching X Touch control surface, and that thing feels substantial, and that thing is designed specifically for it. So would I use a $100 plastic MIDI controller? No.
Alex?
Yeah, I really like motorized faders. like I don't really, I mean, if I don't have motorized faders, I'm not going to put it in production. Like I have non-motorized faders at home in my home system, but I wouldn't. I need to know where things are, so I wouldn't use them if they weren't controlled.
Next question.
From the QR code, Dr. Andrew T. in Phoenix, Arizona. I need a video recording system to record intra-op surgery videos for teaching veterinarians and veterinary students. We already have the Extron SMP111. I was looking at Blackmagic Micro Studio 4K, but would love assistance and guidance.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I never actually had to shoot, but I have edited video that came out of a surgical suite. And as a matter of fact, I did some work with a friend of mine at a hospital locally. I was surprised. I thought it was going to be pretty simple because of the fact that surgical fields obviously are incredibly well lit. You have those multi-directional lights that light up the surgeon's field of view. It turned out to be different. I was surprised at the amount of footage I got back where it was hard for me to get much depth of field. And I think it's because that surgical light was so bright and the camera's dynamic range was not bright enough to handle the difference between the brightly lit areas and the more shadowy areas below organs and things like that. So actually, I would definitely think about shooting raw if you can to be able to recover, diminish those highlights and bring up the shadows and things like that. Angles are going to be difficult. You know, in the circumstances we were in, they were operating on humans in some of the cases and on animals in others. And it was it was clear that they were having to spend a lot of time thinking about the protocol of being able to bring extra equipment into a surgical suite. First of all, it had to be approved, and the sterilization protocols and the rest of that were big deals, I understood from the field footage that I was getting. It worked out okay, but I would definitely see if you can talk to somebody who does a lot of surgical shooting and get the best suggestions from them. I would think that broader, softer lights, if it's okay for the surgeon who controls everything about this, would get you more of that even field and avoid some of the problems that I ran into when I tried to help in the edit side of that for people. That's what I know about it.
Alex?
I've actually seen surgery spaces that are using the older versions of this Blackmagic Studio, and that looked pretty successful. It's very high resolution, and the new ones have the newer chips in them, which will be a little bit more sensitive than the older ones. One of the things to think about is a motorized. There's a handful of the I think they're iOS, but they're motorized Panasonic lenses that you may want to think about, or looking at a motorized lens. So thinking about what you may want to do to control that lens and to be able to zoom in and out. There are a lot of controls there. So there's a variety of controls that go into that camera. You can actually control the camera with a game control, or not a game controller, but a plane controller. So inside of at least the last version, I haven't used the newest version. So, but I would look at that. There are some advantages to being able to shade the camera and change a bunch of things remotely with the switcher. So you'd be able to cut back and forth, but it also means that you could make fine adjustments if you needed to aperture and focus and so on and so forth. There is some discussion about using continuous autofocus. The only problem you may have with that is without a face, it's going to roam all over the place. The details that it's looking at, it won't know what should be in focus and what shouldn't be in focus. And so that may be, you may find that roams a lot if you're in autofocus. So you might want to think about that. Also, in some cases, you may find that things like probe lenses are pretty interesting. These are long snoots of a lens that will go onto the end of the camera that you can get down into locations if you want to pull it down. Also think about where those cameras might be. You may want to think about putting them in something that's hanging from the ceiling that is, you can move around. You can kind of go, I'm going to move it down and let it go, and it'll just stay there. So there's think about ways that you can kind of be move as you work kind of thing, as well as some fixed lenses that are there.
Courtney?
I know you mentioned the Extron recorder, but you might look also, besides the camera, at getting a HyperDeck Pro, because you could mount this outside the operating system, outside the operating room, on SDI cables or HDMI cables if it's not too far away. And because it has endless recording, I don't know how long veterinary operating sessions are, but a lot of times operating sessions can last several hours. And so you don't want to have to be replacing the media in your camera or a recorder in the middle of an operation, because you might miss something. These will ping pong between the different SSDs that you have plugged into them, and it'll automatically shift over from one when it's full to the next one. Then you stick a new blank one in the other one, and then an hour later it'll switch back. So take a look at those. That might be a better way to go for the rack mount stuff in the other room. That way you don't have to worry about keeping it sanitary and sterilized.
Bill?
I'm going to support one thing Alex said, which is the movability of the cameras. That's one of the frustrations I had as the editor for this footage, was that when the surgeon's hands go in to do something, many times my field of view of what they were actually doing got blocked by that. So if I had a system that would allow me to move the camera in all dimensions, even inches sometimes, to expose what the scalpel was actually cutting as opposed to seeing the back of the surgeon's hands, that would have been really useful to me. So I would probably think about multiple cameras with multiple angles that you could move around to get that correct angle. And if there were lights by those cameras to illuminate what it was seeing, that would be great. So those are some things I would think about if I was trying to design a system like this.
Next question.
Clive Ludford in Kingston, Jamaica is asking, how useful would automated video switching be for your interviews? Mix Effect Pro can help those on Mac. Is there something similar for Windows? How will AI affect this aspect of production? Would you trust a program to switch or a person?
Alexander?
Audio follows video, great technology. That's an absolute last resort. I mean, if there was no one there to operate the camera switcher and you needed it, I can't speak for other people, but I would never use any kind of automated camera switching. I prefer to cut stuff myself. Nice thing about like products like the Blackmagic ATEM ISO switchers is that even if you make a mistake in the cutting of the show, you can take that DaVinci project file and fix your edits. So that is very useful. Where I would use AI for this type of thing would be if, for example, I'm working with tight deadlines and I'm doing productions where, like, for example, with podcasts, which I don't have a lot of time for, but they take a lot of time. If I was doing a multicam edit, which is a lot of labor to do, there are great tools now. I think Descript does this, or probably other products in Premiere that does this, where you can just drop a multicam file and it can do the switching for you, and it's incredible. It works very, very well. So I think in specific scenarios in post, it makes sense. For a live production, I wouldn't use it.
Bill?
Yeah, to me, this seems a little bit like the music videos that cut on the beat. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you're working with a march that's very regular in terms of tempo, it could be a fine technique and you could get a very satisfying result out of that. For me, the whole point of creative cutting is to cut more like jazz. So you anticipate the moment that you need to give them a moment to rest on a scene before the thing happens, and then they're like in jazz, lagging behind the beat can be a very successful technique. So it takes the control out of the person's hands who are making those decisions and makes it in some fashion algorithmic. I don't think that's necessarily bad depending on the kind of video you're doing, but I would always want to have a system like most of the multicam systems in our editing software today that allows the machine to make its choices, you know, on the beat or whatever, but then you can go in, particularly for post, and shift back and forth. I would not feel great if I was forced to do live with an automated system that was making them on some kind of algorithmic basis. I just think that would get boring after a while, but try it out, see what happens.
Alex?
It depends about what you have there. So the question is, do you have someone who is good at what they do to edit the show? So if you have someone that has some talent in editing the show, you're always going to be better off letting them edit the show. If you don't have someone with very much experience or hasn't done this very much, you may find that you have a better product by having it done by a machine. So that sometimes medium is better than worse, if someone it doesn't have a lot of experience in that area. So you may decide that that's there. I think that it was interesting. I looked at the video, and what I thought was interesting about it was that it didn't always cut like methodically to the person talking. It seemed like it was doing reaction cuts, and I don't know whether that was something that was done by them later, or whether Mix Effect Pro does that. I don't know what's actually happening, but it looked like it was more than just cutting to the person talking. So if I do think that you could turn with enough controls, you could do something that implicitly controls something that would cut a show that most people would think is very viewable, especially when you think about doing a show where it's primarily a podcast, like what they're kind of setting up, but you're doing a video version of it and you don't have a big staff to do something else. Being able to set all those feature sets in so that it just kind of automatically produces a video version for it, I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. So it just depends on what level of art you're trying to get to. I can definitely see a lot of places where you just don't have the bandwidth or the skill set to cut the show yourself, and it would I think that it could sort that stuff out.
Courtney?
I think it kind of depends on whether you're doing post-production on this stuff. If you're doing post-production and you're going to have an editor that you can deal with it, you're going to end up with a better cut. A lot of these new AI systems are not just using video follows audio, but what they're doing is they're building in delays. So as soon as they hear another person talking, they wait to see if that conversation is going to go on for a few seconds before they cut. And that gives you a little more naturalistic feel, because it doesn't feel like just, when somebody clears their throat, suddenly cuts to them for no reason, then cuts back because somebody else is continuing to talk. That can be a problem with the very regimented video follows audio. So it's, once the audio exceeds a certain level, it'll switch to that video. coming in from that audio feed. But yeah, it's the video that I looked at there that in your example seems to be with the hysteresis. It's cutting a few seconds after the audio starts, and sometimes that gives you the impression of you're staying on a reaction shot of the other person because it stays on them for a few seconds after they've stopped talking and the other person starts, and so you see their facial reaction for a few seconds before it cuts to the person who's speaking. And so that can give you a much more naturalistic feel. So with AI and the ability to tune in the amount of delay between the video following the audio makes it a much more naturalistic cut. And it eliminates things like somebody coughing or clearing their throat and it's switching to them.
Alex?
Yeah, and one of the things that this is live because it would not be able to create. I mean, it's driving an ATEM, so it actually is doing a live cut. And in a lot of cases, if you're producing a lot of content or the content doesn't have a lot of budget, you do want to cut it live and just deliver it because you're not going to have time to go back and spend the time to re-edit it. So having something that again does it fairly methodically for a lot of shows, especially a lot of corporate stuff or education, I think it actually could be a very good solution to what Courtney was talking about. The thing that we found was that being able to adjust the threshold of when it's going to cut, the attack on how long it will wait before it cuts, and being able to do that per person, and then being able to add flavor to it, like it's going to cut back and forth every once in a while either way. There's lots of ways that you could build something, I think, especially with AI, where, like, for instance, you could do something where if there's certain things, like if a person starts nodding, an AI solution could go, oh, I should cut to them for a second while the other person's talking, that kind of thing. You can build a lot of things into it that, down the road that would be very responsive and end up with something that isn't as good as a human, isn't as good as a talented human, but probably better than an average editor.
I like what Alexander had said earlier with regards to like podcasting and how much time it takes. And I'm addressing more so the AI part of the question. Could it do this? Yes, definitely. And I think some of the things that we need to think about when we hear the word AI, not just the automation part of it, but the fact that you are training it on what you want it to do. So will that be instantaneous now? Like I think Adobe Premiere, they've got features in there that it can do auto cutting for you. And of course, Descript is a tool we use all the time. I'm a huge fan of Descript. But if you focus on the fact of that you can train it for what you want it to do, that's really where the future of post-production takes place. And also wanting to bring in some comments from the community. Mickey says, automated cutting is not cognizant of emotions and nonverbal reactions. And also he says that content is easy to produce or easy to watch, rarely both. And David said voice switching is like beneath the valley of the dolls editing. Alex?
and I do agree with Mickey that content is easy to produce or easy to watch, but rarely both. And very much so. I've been known to say that every once in a while. But what I will say is that one of the things I've become cognizant of is how much content doesn't go out because it's too hard to produce. So you just don't put it out because you don't have, and things that you wish that you had out there. I look at I think I've really thought about this a lot related to AI voices, in the sense that I particularly like listening to books. I don't really like reading them. And so when I see books, especially older books or lots and lots of magazine articles and so on and so forth, I realized because we had to hire a human, it just didn't get done. It's not that a human lost their job doing it or whatever. There's just a ton of content that I can't listen to because it's too expensive to do it. It doesn't pencil out. And so I think that we need to keep that in mind as well. Is this better than nothing? And it might be in some cases.
Next question.
From the QR code, Robert White in Jacksonville, Florida is asking, as a strictly analog PA system operator for most of my career, why should I move to digital mixing equipment? I mostly do church services, youth groups, small local bands and bars, etc.
Alexander?
Well, Robert, if that workflow works for you and you know how to use that gear really well, I don't see why you should feel pressure to suddenly switch to a completely digital system for mixing. There's obviously a lot of advantages. There's pros and cons to actually both types of setups. Both are very valid. Both are valid for analog and digital. There are front of house engineers for massive rock bands that still tour with only analog gear. Dave Natal, who's the front of house for the Rolling Stones, he tours with a large format analog console, of course with spare parts in case things go wrong, and he doesn't actually even use compression. But if that works for you, you should continue to use it. The main advantages of digital, obviously, are that you don't have to carry a lot of outboard gear or any outboard gear if you don't want, because these digital consoles have incredible DSP processing built into it. So all the compression and parametric EQ and other dynamics processing you could want is available on every single input and every single output on that console. So you can get the whole package size down to a lot smaller, and you don't have to carry as much. So that's the main advantage. But if you have analog gear and you like it, I would say just continue to use it.
Courtney?
A couple of other advantages is noise. There's a lot less noise in digital systems because you can use a digital snake that just runs over Ethernet to do a stage box on stage, so that you have just short runs of your microphone cables that go into preamps on the stage and then goes via digital back to the console. The other thing is feedback suppression is a lot better in digital equipment. So that you can, and feedback is, the major bugaboo of live PA audio, especially if you're moving around between different venues that have different amount of reflective surfaces in them, and the different placement on speakers if they're existing speakers and so on. So that's another advantage. And like was said earlier, there's a lot of plugins you can get to deal with all kinds of things, and it's much more compact and a lot less noise. You don't have to worry about the noise on the pots in an analog switcher, where the signal's running through the pot, unless you're using an analog switcher that's using control voltages. Then it's not really an analog switcher, an analog mixer, so to speak.
Bill?
I think all of us in our careers have to figure out what our personal profile is in terms of wanting to hold on to the things we know really well from the past and what we want to explore when we know that there's a future coming that allows additional capabilities or just different capabilities. I'm not ever going to say one is better than the other. And somebody working in analog art, for example, may be brilliant and want to keep doing what they're doing. But we also see that the new generation is using these digital tools, and they're making more interesting, equally interesting is probably a better way to put it, art with that. So it depends personally on when you want to move forward. I'm just reminded of auto racing, where for years the stock car folks said it was manual transmissions, no automatic transmission can ever do. Well, if you look at the Indy line now, the people at the top edge of that technology, they're all using automatic transmissions because the computers can sense and switch faster and they get better results that way. Doesn't mean it's better. It just means that if you don't pay attention to what's happening at the leading edge of your industry, you're making a decision to stay rooted in what you love. And again, I support that wholeheartedly, but boy, there's a lot of stuff out there on the leading edge of digital that is making things really a lot easier for humans. And I wouldn't ignore that. That's just how I feel about it.
Next question.
Craig McFarlane in Boston, Massachusetts is asking, a new 8x8 HDMI matrix is the first thing with a very audible fan noise. Are there simple ways to shield without a cabinet or placing in another room with 16 long HDMI cables?
Bill?
Well, when I think about these kind of things, and we talk about it a lot in the voiceover community about treating rooms and trying to get rogue sounds out of microphones and shielding them. And there are all sorts of, little baffles you can put around microphones. And I kind of tell people, think about it in terms of how smell propagates. And let's take a positive smell everybody likes. Let's say something like a warm loaf of baked bread. You pull that out of the oven. Now, how do you keep that from going through the whole room? The answer is it's very difficult. Unless you encase it in something, you're not going to keep that odor away from permeating everything. And sounds you don't want can be like that. Particularly types of sounds. And we've traditionally said, high frequency stuff, you can put baffles in and it'll lower the high frequency. For something like the car going by in the neighborhood with the incredible bass power system listening to music, it's really hard to keep that out. Literally, if you're in a room, it'll rattle the whole house to the point where it propagates into your microphone regardless of how much baffling you do, unless you build a huge room within a room with big walls. So it's always difficult, and I always like to think of that odor thing. How do I keep any of the smell from getting in toward my microphone? It is very hard and requires a lot of engineering and a lot of effort, and that's just the way physics works. You have to accept it and learn to deal with it.
Courtney?
I used to have this problem all the time in doing computer stuff on the set where you're recording, and being a former sound mixer, I'm fairly sensitive to fan noise on a dramatic show where you're trying to cut dialogue, and you've got 4 computers that have to be on the set, all of them with fans running. And so what I would do is I would open them up. I don't know how comfortable you are with this, Craig, but open them up, and I'd put a resistor in line with those cooling fans and a switch on them, so that when they needed to be quiet, I could switch them and they would half the fan speed, and that would reduce the fan speed to a level that was still not audible. I mean, that was generally not audible, and would be still able to keep the equipment cool enough that it wouldn't overheat. And I'm not sure if that 8x8 HDMI matrix is generating a lot of heat to begin with. They may have just spec'd a noisy fan for it. There are quiet fans that are designed to be much quieter. So you might see about replacing the fans in that HDMI matrix. Anytime you try and attenuate the sound without changing the airflow of the unit itself, it ends up overheating anyway, because then the heat will build up in a cabinet, and then it's just sucking hot air in across the material, so it's not cooling efficiently. So you have to have baffles in that trap the sound. It gets very expensive to build cabinets that are soundproof, but still keep the equipment cool.
Alex?
Yeah, we've used a wide variety of quiet racks. So these are racks that rack mounts that you can put these in, and they will definitely knock it down. Even if you leave the back open a little bit, you'll find that they will oftentimes drop 20 or 30 dB of sound. So if you've just got a little bit of fan noise, oftentimes that'll knock that out. So that's something to think about there. You do need to think about ventilation. Some of them come with fans. So they have fans on the front that are pushing air in, and fans on the back that are pushing it out, and they are very quiet, like they're inaudible to have these fans pushing the air through those things. And obviously they're designed that way. And so we've used ones where our servers sound like jet engine. We used to call them jet engines, and these are these elemental 600s and 700s. When you turn them on, you know that they're on. They're 1U, and they're pulling a lot of air through them. And so we put them in those environments, and it dramatically changes the profile. So you can make that actually work. Having something like a mix pre with a noise assist also can help. I've got lots of little fan noises that you don't hear because I have a noise assist on, so you can fix it in the mic as well. It's obviously always better to fix it in the location if you can. But those are things to think about there. Eventually, as Mickey said, you might end up with a SDI workflow and the stuff in another room. I'm strongly considering that. I'm still in an HDMI workflow, but I'm very close to moving my home desk to an SDI workflow again.
And Alexander?
Yeah, a few things. So number one, if you are within the return window, if you just bought this, you may want to consider buying a different HDMI matrix. I have one from TestSmart that's a 4x4. I see that it's got perforated holes on the side. I don't know if it has a fan, but I can't hear it. I have had my ear right up to that thing. Zero fan noise. If it's out of warranty and you've had it for a while and it's just annoying you, another thing like Courtney said, you could look at replacing the fan. Noctua is a brand that you would want to look at for fans because they make really, really quiet fans. So you might be able to find a fan that's the same size. Look at the specs. It might move the same amount of air, but be like 6 dB quieter. That's another thing that you can do, of course, exchange at your own peril if you're worried about warranty or anything like that. And of course, you can move it away, but then the thing with HDMI is that you have loss over 20 feet. So if you need to move it farther, you're going to have to look at something like very expensive fiber HDMI cables.
And Alex?
And Mickey says that he likes the Silenex over the Noctua. So that's another brand to think about. And David Brady asks, what make is the Matrix? Oh, I thought he said, what is the Matrix? I was like, you've been living in a dream world, Mr. Anderson. But he said, pill. Yeah, let us know what exactly. The one that I use is the 8x8, the Matrix, the Blackbird 8x8 Matrix. Mine doesn't make almost, I don't know if it makes any noise. So if it is making noise, you also may want to think about sending it back and get another one.
Next question.
Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas asks, did Gabriel Medina shoot the greatest sports photo ever at the surfing event at the Olympics? That's what Digital Camera World and I can't even read that number. Is that 9,220,388 likes say?
Alex?
Yeah, it was a mixture of a surfer knowing what he was doing and a photographer knowing it was coming or had an idea that it was coming or just responded very quickly. Here's the picture. And so the surfer, it's funny, if you watch the actual video, it is just a moment. Like it is a moment in time where he's up there for less than a second. But he definitely did it on purpose. Like it was like he knew what he was doing. He was going to create this kind of shot. And now, of course, there's a lot of variables that could happen that wouldn't create the shot. But it looked like this is something he's done before. Like he definitely looked like he had done this kind of thing before, but I don't think anybody ever had captured it that way. It does look like he's just floating there with his surfboard, but it doesn't look like anything when you actually see the video. Like it looks like a nothing. Like he just kind of hops up and puts his hand up. So it's amazing how photography can create something that is just, if you watch watched it in the real world, you wouldn't have even thought much of it.
And Courtney?
And of course, you got to remember, digital cameras can shoot 15, 20 frames per second.
Or more, yeah.
Or more, yeah, more if you don't have a shutter, yeah, if they're shutterless. Then so they can, you can capture a whole string and just pick the one that's the perfect moment.
Next question.
From Tony Mobley in Noonan, Georgia, I'm using an M1 MacBook Pro for House of Worship for recording in Zoom. Is there a recommendation from panel for a separate recording for House of Worship? I would use the MacBook for other things, limited budget.
Tony, do you want to take a moment to just set us up here?
So I'm just recording Zoom services for the House of Worship. And I'm using my MacBook Pro coming into the meeting as a separate device. And I'm just recording. I get co-host permission and I just do a recording. And I just feel like it's kind of a waste of my MacBook to just be using it for the recording. And so I was looking for another solution to be able to make a recording and be able to use the MacBook for something else.
Go ahead, Alex.
Well, you'll need something to join Zoom, I think, to record it, because you're trying to record the Zoom, right? So you're trying to record Zoom itself. Now, remember that Zoom can record that to the cloud, so that's one possibility. So you can have Zoom record your service just in the cloud completely. It doesn't have to use your computer. I don't think the quality is as high, but it is. But you can just have it record. So many people do that as well.
The only issue with that is that it's not my meeting, and the participants are not interested in paying the additional cost of the cloud recording. So that's why
is there an additional cost for cloud recording? If you have just the basic Pro account, I thought that it's like 15.
If it's more than 5 gigs, then you have to pay for. If you use 5 gigs, then that's it.
Right. You would be able to, what you would do is take it down immediately. So it's 5 gigs, but it's only 5 gigs of storage. So it can record your whole, and you would, I think a whole session would probably only be maybe a gig or 2 per show. We used to do it. People like me took advantage of it. During COVID, they didn't enforce that. And so I think office hours, we got up to nearly, I think 2 terabytes of storage on finally we got this thing like, hey, you got to take it down. so anyway, so I think that you can, But I think you can go to the cloud. It doesn't cost you anything. It's going to keep it there. You just have to download it right afterwards. You could probably put 1 or 2 sessions up there at a time. You can look at it, but I bet you the sessions aren't more than a gig. So with 5 gigs of storage would probably be enough to make that happen. So if you really are looking to free it up, that'd be one way to do it. Something's in Zoom, so I would, you could have another option is, I have the way my setup is right now with my ATEM is one of the inputs of my ATEM is computers, and I have the little ATEM shuttle, the HyperDeck shuttle, and I have one of the programs out of my switcher goes into the shuttle, and it will record anything that's going through the switcher with audio if I route it. So if you had your computer routing to the switcher and sent audio over that HDMI cable, it would go into your switcher and go into the HyperDeck. Of course, that's an extra cost, but it's not particularly. I don't think it's that expensive. It depends. I mean, it's everything. Everything's expensive to some degree, but I think that you would then get the screen record out, which is, I guess, kind of what you're doing now. So that might be another way to go. But I think that the easiest thing to do would be to just use Zoom's cloud recording and simply pull it down every week or every other week.
Alexander?
Yeah, so if they, I don't know if they have a camera switcher, but if they have a camera switcher, I'm assuming it doesn't have any internal recording capabilities. But if you can get a free HDMI output out of your camera switcher, you can get an inexpensive HDMI to USB encoder like the Roland UVC01, connect that to your MacBook, then just open up QuickTime. Now in QuickTime, if you set the recording quality to maximum, that will actually record a ProRes 422 high quality recording. And the nice thing about ProRes, it actually takes less processing power than H.264. So I don't know how big the internal drive is on the MacBook, but if it's just like an hour recording, if you have like a 500 gig drive, should be plenty of space to record that. So that's what I would suggest. I think the UVC01's about $150 for the encoder, and then you just need to get a HDMI feed out of your camera system, and you'd be essentially your screen scraping Zoom, but I mean on a very tight budget, that is workable.
Next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada. Is MS Visio usable for line drawings? I'm used to using Omnigraffle, but work requires a Windows solution.
Ryan?
So there are a couple multi-platform options here too. You've got Lucid, which is kind of mostly a web experience. And you've got Figma as a tool that's definitely oriented a little bit more towards user interface design. But I see some people using for a really wide variety of options, and then Canva is another one that could be considered. But I use Visio almost every single day on a Windows machine, and am a big fan of Visio as well.
Courtney?
And Visio, there is a web app from Microsoft. There's a Visio web app to work cross-platform, so you could have people join and operate and edit the Visio plans that are even on the Macintosh platform or another Linux platform because it's web-based.
Next question.
Next question is from Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York. Looking to set up an automation between my X32 and my instance of vMix. Is it possible to have an overlay pushed to program when consistent audio is detected on a certain channel, and then have the opposite happen when audio is no longer detected?
Alex?
I don't know the answer to this because I don't know vMix well enough to know how that would actually work. But what you're looking for is what protocols can you use to talk to vMix, and then what can measure that audio. So you have audio coming out, and that can be delivered as OSC from the X32. So there's OSC information there that could be grabbed onto by something that could talk OSC. So then it's a matter of figuring out what vMix talks to, and so you need something that can talk to the whatever languages vMix can handle, and something that can handle OSC from the X32. And you take that meter data and pass it in, and that might be one of the solutions that would work.
Next question.
Jeff Veely in Henderson, Texas. Any suggestions on creating a virtual roulette wheel with customizable sections that can be used for games with kids? I'd like the sections to animate and expand when selected, showing more text.
Bill?
I would imagine that the big motion graphics packages, Motion, After Effects, and things like that could probably do this. I would suggest it's probably going to be a lot of fiddly work and take somebody who's really skilled at this to make it happen. First of all, if you're actually trying to get a regulation kind of roulette wheel, that's a lot of fine details. I can't remember. I'm not a big gambler, so I don't remember how many numbers there are around there, 32 or something, plus the little green and stuff like that. It would be a lot of design time. Making the motion vectors to make it spin would not be that difficult. Most of them have things like that in there. But I think that you're looking for somebody with a lot of skill and a lot of talent, and it would take them a lot of time to get anything that's semi-realistic. You might want to look into, if you want something simpler, just a Wheel of Fortune kind of wheel that doesn't have that many divisions and would be simpler in geometry and detail. Particularly if you're going to pop out whatever they're going to do. But I would imagine the tools are there. It's just the ability and the time to execute it for something for a kid project.
Courtney?
Yeah, every time you have something moving in a rotational area, you have to use a lot of geometry. So it's a pretty tough programming task. Plus, if you're going to have little animated segments that have to animate, and like the animations have to be right side up, depending upon where the wheel stops, that could be a problem. Also, the randomization, if you want it to be a true gameplay, you have to make sure that when they spin the wheel, it goes for a random amount of time and it stops in a random place. So randomization is a tough thing to do in a computer accurately. Otherwise, it gets into repetitive patterns. To be accurate and fair, so that takes a lot of work. So you could hire a programmer. Maybe you could ask AI to write something to do this in JavaScript. Maybe you could do it. I don't know. I haven't tried to do that. But coding is getting better and better with the AI tools and writing code.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's asking, so glad to see Tony Mobley back. How are you feeling?
How are you, Tony?
I'm doing better. I'm getting better every day. I've been doing some walking, which is a big deal. I got sick on New Year's Eve, and I was in the hospital from January 2nd through January 8th. Was in rehab from January 18th, to February 8th. And been home since then, and was kind of locked away in a hospital bed in my home. And I had a wheelchair, but the wheelchair was too big to go through the door. And so a family friend donated a wheelchair that would actually go through the door, which is how I've been getting around. And so during that process, I had a visit from a professional lighting director that decided that he would come to Noonan, Georgia, and actually move my studio from my living room into my new studio area. And so now I have great lights, and I'm still tweaking my setup and looking forward to one of our panel meetings on Saturday, having a ruthless review of my setup, and because I want to still continue to get better. And we are going to have conversation with Tony Mobley return on August 21st with Mr. Andy Carluccio. So that will be our first show back, our first show of 2024, actually. So looking forward to that. But I want to thank everyone for all of the well wishes, and we're doing a lot better, continuing to improve every day.
So happy that you're back, Tony. So happy. Next question.
Greg Stovell in New York City is asking, I have a Mac Mini M2 and would love to be able to run 3 displays with it. So far, I think it's limited to 2. I may switch to the new Mini M4 Pro when it comes out. If I don't, however, is there anything I can use to run 3 displays? Alex?
Well, I wouldn't use this in production. We have people using these pluggables. So this is a pluggable USB triple display. Now, it'll only do 2 displays. But what it will do is it can do 1 4K display or 2 1080p displays, and a variety of other things, as you can see from the hub. So again, I wouldn't necessarily put that into production. I know some people who do, but that will allow you to extend one of your two USB-C or Thunderbolt connections in the back into 2 monitors, and then you'd be able to get to 3 total.
And Courtney?
Yeah, there's a company. DisplayLink is the one that has the drivers. You do have to load custom drivers. There's a company called Sonitech that makes this similar thing that Alex was talking about, USB 3 DisplayLink to dual 4K 60 hertz HDMI adapter. That's only about $99, and it says it is compatible with M1 and M2 Macs. So it should work fine with your Mac Mini that has a single display port. I mean, just USB-C output for monitor.
Awesome. We've got a great show lined up for you all week long. Q&A Tuesday and Wednesday. On Thursday, we will have the CEO of HMS Media. And then on Friday, you want to be here as we talk about dongles, adapters, and cables and all the more. Saturday is our Q&A. And if you want to participate and be on the panel, you want to be for our volunteer show. And of course, Sunday is introspective. So for more, head over to officehours.global, and we look forward to seeing you.